Hey everyone, Infinity here. If you don't know who I am a professional esports commentator. I've been so for the last 8 years. If you're watching this video, you probably know me best for my work in Call of Duty Mobile esports, specifically the Snapdragon Pro Series and the Call of Duty Mobile World Championships last year. I've been wanting to make a lot of video content recently, and I've got a lot of free time now, and so I decided, well, now is probably the time to do it. So if you guys want any kind of content from me about Call of Duty esports, be it mobile, challengers, or even CDL, give me suggestions. Hit me up either on Twitter or in the comment section below, and I'll have a look and see what content you guys want, and perhaps even execute on some of it. With that said then, I did want to create a video today because I wanted to talk about this. This is the slot allocation for regions for the Call of Duty Mobile World Championships for 2025. We've been waiting for this for a really long time, and we anticipated some changes from last year. It turns out there weren't quite as many changes as we expected. So first things first, obviously we knew that Africa would be involved in the competition. We knew that one region had to give up a spot to do that, at least one spot. For all we know, Africa could have had 2 spots, probably not likely, but still. And Europe was the region that gave up a spot. Now, that's kind of unfortunate in a way, even though it's what we expected. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. But still, to nobody's surprise, Europe was the region that gave a spot up to Africa. And for the most part, I think people expected that to be the case. They accepted that that was going to be the case before we got this news through. But people are still not very happy, and the reason that they're unhappy is this entire half of the slot allocation up here. In the North America and Latin America have not had their allocations changed from 2024, and neither have China nor Garena. Why is this an issue? Why are people upset? And I'm going to give you guys a brief explainer, if you're not into the loop, as to why this has been perceived as problematic. And to do so, I'm going to take a look at champs from last year. The overarching point then, if we look over towards champs from last year, I'm going to switch things over for you guys, is you look at the teams that managed to qualify from last year. X-Rock, Q9, and Wolves, all from China. The 3 Chinese teams all made it into the top 8. You look at Garena, and you look at, I don't know why this is open, excuse me. You guys can't see right now, but this is Elevate. And this is still what both of these teams, the 2 teams qualified from Garena last year, and both made it into the top 8. So 5 of the top 8 teams last year were from China and Garena. And the resounding response to that from last season was that people were saying, hey, China and Garena, they need more spots. China needs 4 and Garena needs 3 because there's a lot of talent. And even last year, we were having these conversations about teams, I think specifically about Standpoint Gaming in China, that, hey, China's really competitive. They should probably get some more spots. And that conversation has only been exacerbated in the last year or so because China has gotten more competitive. We take a look at Chinese Masters, right? This is Chinese Masters. It's the premier tournament in Call of Duty Mobile esports. I would argue outside of champs, it is the premier Call of Duty Mobile esports tournament. And you can see here that the talent pool in China is hugely deep. You have the usual suspects in Wolves and Q9 and X-Rock here as well, but you've also got All Gamers, Kingzone, and Standpoint, all in that conversation, right? Standpoint obviously were in that conversation previously. You also have these additional teams as well. And the point being, China's talent pool is really deep. And it's difficult to argue that teams like Standpoint, All Gamers, and Kingzone wouldn't demolish some of the teams from Europe, Latin America, and North America, and obviously, as we saw with Diablos' performance in China Masters, Japan as well. The point being, China has a really deep talent pool. You can't accommodate for this entirely. Like, you couldn't have 6 spots to China. That's not a feasible solution. But I do think that an expansion to 4 or 5 would probably resolve the bottleneck that exists with Chinese teams qualifying for champs. This issue is also exacerbated by the fact that you have OUG, the #1 North American team, and for those of you guys who don't know who those guys are, Tectonic, Solo, Raph, Cartels, Kings, and Jabin and Seven, who are newer names to the scene. These guys are all phenomenal players from North America. They have dominated North America over the last few years, and they went over to China to compete as OUG. And so OUG in particular are an interesting spot where they are once again going to compete in China Masters for Season 10. They are not going back to North America because they can't, because they're representing OUG. And so if they want to qualify via champs, they have to do so via North America. Now, that's an aside point. It's unlikely that OUG will qualify as much as I want them to qualify. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, solely because of the fact that they are in a very competitive region. And also you look at where they finished last season. And, obviously this would be outside the top 3. It's very far outside of the top 3. And so outside of some market improvements for OUG, I don't see them qualifying via Season 10. It makes things interesting, though, doesn't it, that the number one North American team is effectively competing in China, and they are going to make it more difficult for themselves to qualify by competing in China. But it's not just China. It's also Garena. Looking back towards the most recent Garena tournament, this is GSI, the Garena Summer Invitational. There was also Garena Masters before that, but both would really serve my point pretty well here. You have some really competitive teams in Garena. You have last year's competitors, Elevate and Stalwart, in the competition. For the most part, those teams have not made any changes. They are pretty much the same teams as last year. And yet, despite that, Elevate won the competition. But you also have ABC Esports and Absolute Zero beating Stalwart out in GSI. They outplaced them, which goes to show that there is a lot of talent given how good Stalwart were last year. Like, you go back to Champs and Stalwart, they placed top 8, but you go down to the bracket, and I know there was a lot of controversy over this. If Stalwart don't place Q9, if they don't face Q9 in the first round of play, if they face Luminosity or Galaris, they probably make it into the top 4. Stalwart are just that good of a team, and so that should tell you also how good of a region Garena actually are, how competitive Absolute Zero and ABC and frankly a lot of teams in Garena are. So you've got China and Garena, which have only grown in strength since last year. And on the flip side of that conversation, you go back to Champs last year, and North America and LATAM did not perform that well. Luminosity made it to Champs. Obviously, that's effectively, again, you've got a lot of names there from OUG. Luminosity, they were the highest performing team last year, and they bottomed out at top 8. They did not make it through to the quarterfinals. They had a tough competition. They lost to Galaris. But you look outside of that, and Tribe and Supreme Team did not make it to playoffs. They had a few close matches, but outside of that, I think it was fair to say that coming out of last year, people expected North America to be reduced down by 1 spot. That problem has only got worse for North America, because we look over to the North American Wikipedia for Season 6, and I mean, you compare Season 5, for example. You go back to Season 5, and you've got rosters like Status Quo, Tribe, and Nexus, all really competitive teams, all could be super competitive with some of the best teams in the world, but even then, that wasn't good enough to make it out of the Swiss stage of the competition. You look at Season 6 and you compare those teams from Season 5 to Season 6, and the talent pool has, I think, gotten worse, right? Despite the fact that we've had a lot of Mexican players and a lot of new Mexican teams come into the competition, I think the best way to sum this up is to say, look at NA Fall-Offs. This is a team with some retired players competing in it, but mostly it's a team that, going back to Season 6, there were moments where they were not really trying that hard. They wouldn't scrim, they wouldn't warm up before games. They just basically go in cold and end up losing some games because of it. And despite that attitude, they still got second place. No disrespect towards Undream or On Mythic, but you throw these guys against some mid-table teams from China and Garena, and I don't know those matches would be that close. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But at least I think at face value, the generally accepted opinion is that North America is nowhere near as competitive as China and Garena. And you go back to Champs, and that's also true of Latin America, that, albeit Ancient and 4Magic Vitrini, they had their issues of visas. Galaris is really the only team that actually could be competitive with the best of the best, and could really be considered one of the best of the best in the world. And so I think, coming off that then, people expected, when it comes down to this regional distribution, for North America and for Latin America to be reduced by 1 spot each. That didn't happen. China and Garena, still the same spots as last year, and that's why people are upset. Now, where's my take on this? Honestly, I believe at face value that, North America and Latin America should only have 2 spots each. I think that's especially true given exactly what I just said about how kind of shallow those talent pools actually are on an international level at this point in time. And Garena and China should absolutely have 1 more spot each. And I think that would be the perfect solution here. With that said, though, there is another thing that I think people need to consider. And that is that there is a potential for a self-fulfilling prophecy to take place if you remove spots from other regions like North America, like Latin America, and like they have done with Europe. In that, if you don't incentivize those regions to get better, to bring them to the global stage, those regions will get worse over time. And this has happened. And I know this has happened because I've not just casted Call of Duty Mobile, I've also casted Call of Duty Challengers. And you can see over there with the decline of other regions outside of North America, with declining support for Asia Pacific over the last half a decade, how they went from having teams in Call of Duty Challengers, or then the open brackets, like teams like Mindfreak being like the best teams in the world, to not even being top 24, top 32 at open events. And that's all because of declining support for that region, declining investment in that region. Same is happening right now for Europe, where Europe went from having multiple LANs a year to not having anything at all. And because of that, there has been less European players competing. And albeit, European teams are still at the top of competition in challenges, there are less of them. There is a shallower talent pool in Europe. And that is, I think, the concern with reducing support for other regions in Call of Duty Mobile, is that you end up creating this kind of spiral of, why would we compete because there's no investment, and then why would you be investment if there's not enough players competing? That's a problem that you want to avoid. And so that might be the reason here that the slots remaining unchanged, because you want to encourage investment in the regions that are struggling comparatively to China and Garena. And the other part of the conversation, obviously, is that Europe has lost a spot. I wanted to bring this up very briefly here. Kind of unfortunate in a way. This is me saying I do think Europe should have lost a spot. I think that makes total sense. But it is kind of unfortunate in a way that Europe did lose a spot at this point in time, because Europe has never been more competitive. Looking over towards this, if I bring this full screen for you guys, you can see here that, Animus and Exclusive have always been top dogs, and that's still the case, but they are being challenged now. You look towards Season 6 qualifiers, and Queens didn't even qualify to this, and this is easily the most competitive season I think I've even casted. I casted back in Season 4, and that was really competitive as well. But you've got a lot of new talent coming through, players on Vanquish, players on Special Suicide Squad, even though those rosters aren't together anymore. There is a lot of new talent coming through in Europe. Europe has gotten better as a region, and so it's kind of unfortunate in a way that now is the time that Europe has had their spot distribution changed. And that's especially true because you've now got this new roster coming in Ace that I've got to see via EACS, and they look like the best team in Europe at the moment, that basically consists of players from Garena and Europe. And, it's a multi-regional team. All of these teams are competing for one spot. And that is crazy to me, that you actually have a really deep and really competitive talent pool in Europe with no guarantee of who's going to get that spot. And I would actually go as far to say right now, this is a hot take, put this one on the timeline, that I think Europe right now is better than North America. I don't think that's a doubt in my mind. If you were to say to me, there's one North American spot and 2 European spots, I don't think there'd be an argument for that being unfair in any way, because I do think Europe has actually gotten a lot better. So kind of unfortunate timing, I think, for European fans who obviously just wanted to see European teams compete. But it does make sense, again, coming off last year, coming really off of the last couple of years of performances from Europe, that this is what has happened. So, again, just trying to wrap this up, I do stand with the idea that I think North America and Latin America should probably have had a spot reduced. They should be 2 spots apiece, and China and Garena do, I think, inarguably need a little bit more representation in champs because of how powerful those regions are, and kind of the bottleneck that will exist owing to the fact that you're not seeing teams in this competition, more teams in this competition from those regions. But with that said, I think people also need to consider the fact that if you do start to reduce the spots in regions outside of China and Garena, you are going to see a self-fulfilling prophecy of investment in those regions and participating in those regions from players, because if there's less of a chance to get onto the world stage, you're probably going to be less willing to try in those regions to earn the limited spots available. So that's today's video. Again, if you guys have anything you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments below. And if you have any thoughts on today's topic, also let me know in the comments because I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today's video. I'll see you whenever I see you guys next time, either in a video or casting some COD Mobile.